Today on the Self Smarter podcast.
So the origin of imposter phenomenon, as it was originally coined and then has now morphed into syndrome, really was focused on women. But the reality is it affects men and women. Now, women just may be more likely to talk about it, where the study came from, and especially as they became more prevalent in the workplace. Hi, we're Danelle and Megan, the hosts of this conversation-centric podcast for leaders seeking to be better every day. Whether you choose to be a leader in the workplace, at home, or in your community, we believe the most effective leaders are equipped to not only be self-starters, but self-smarter.
Hello, and welcome to Self Smarter. I'm Megan, and this is my very tan co-host.
Hello, everyone. I guess I am. I don't know.
Yeah,
I guess I am a little tan. People keep mentioning
It's
it.
either that or excessive bronzer. One or the other.
No, this is all natural. I mean, we took a couple of weeks, and so as our listeners know, we took a little time off, and I spent some time by the pool, I will have to say, with probably a few margaritas in my hand. So yeah, got a little vitamin D over the last couple of weeks. So thanks for noticing, I guess.
Yeah, you sure. I mean, you definitely are looking bright.
Good.
Or,
good.
I don't know, tan.
Tan. Okay.
Tan and shiny and bronze. That's
All
good.
All right.
Okay, I've been saving something over the last 2 weeks. Like, I've been thinking about what I might pop on you at the beginning of a podcast.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah, so I have something. I have a big question because recently we went on a road trip. I mean, recently. It was early in June-ish.
Yes.
Okay. And you drove. Mm-hmm. And I just happened to notice you sit awfully close to the steering wheel.
What?
You sit super close. I'm nervous. I'm nervous about the airbag.
Okay, well, first of all, I thought you were going to talk about my driving. So I kind of feel empowered that you didn't critique my driving. 'Cause I think I'm a good driver.
You are a good driver.
Okay.
You did a good job.
Okay.
This time.
But sitting close to this steering.
You sit extra close.
I do. I know why.
Okay, why?
I haven't thought about it, but it makes sense. I do that because I learned to drive a car. I learned to drive a stick shift. Oh. So I have a long torso, but I have shorter legs. So I had to control the clutch, the brake and the accelerator, the gas. So yeah, I think it's because of that. I think it's because I learned to drive a stick shift. And so growing up in the country, that was just kind of the way we did things. And I guess I feel more in charge when I'm closer to the steering wheel, but I've never had an airbag deflate on me. So I might want to rethink might want to relax a little.
I'm nervous. I was like, man, listener, have you ever been in a car with someone when they're driving, you're in the passenger seat and they're a good foot, in front of you, and you're think it kind of feels like you're in the back.
Well, what if you were reclined? What if you were extra reclined?
I kept trying to arrange. My legs just wouldn't fit under the dash.
You have long legs.
I do.
Right.
Yeah. I have to sit down and load.
Well, now I grew up driving a stick shift at first. That's how I learned to drive at a very young age, and that's why I guess I sit a little close. But I need to be conscious so that in the event,
because I'm going to get a picture of this. Yeah, we're going to go to the car and I'm going to take a picture.
Well, look all you want. I don't think there's going to be a picture. Okay.
That's going to be fun.
That was a fun way to open up this lovely discussion today.
Before we get started, let's jump to our commercial. Before we start, let me just say that I don't know how we'd make it a day at our company without the help of our trusty IT services partner. Moby Systems has been our IT partner for years, and they keep us connected when computers crash and networks go haywire. The team at Moby is super helpful in understanding of people who don't know what the heck to do when equipment goes south. What I know for sure is that without them, we wouldn't be able to run our business as seamlessly as we do. With Moby Systems in your corner, you have peace of mind that they keep an eye on your company and its IT assets. We're offering our listeners a huge bonus to sign up with Moby Systems. Here's the deal. Our listeners will get their first month's service absolutely free, along with additional goodies. For more information, please visit mobysystems.com. That's MOBE systems.com. And be sure to mention Self Smarter for your first month free. What I love most about this topic, Danelle, imposter syndrome, first and foremost, is weird. It's cringy.
Yeah, I don't know that it's weird. It's
cringy.
real. Unfortunately, it is very cringy.
Yeah, it does.
To think about.
Imposter syndrome. But I'm learning more and more when I hear terms that are cringy. I think they're probably something we should explore.
Absolutely.
Because it's like, why is it cringy? And so what I'd love to do is understand what imposter syndrome actually is.
Yeah, I think the thing that makes it less cringy, so let's start with that, is that what I believe, and I'm going to give some statistics and some studies, but I believe to a certain degree we all experience it because it really is rooted from a place of lack of self-confidence and self-awareness. And so and we are believers in that, hence this podcast, that we should be working on those things continuously and becoming more conscious of these things. That I think that's what makes it cringy, is because it can seem like you can come at it from two different ways. Ooh, I know I've experienced that, or ooh, that's someone else's stuff.
Right.
So I think when we make it more understandable and universal where it comes from, why it exists, then we can all lean into it a little bit more and be a little bit more comfortable with it, because
it's like an understanding.
It is.
Yeah, that's what that is.
Yeah. And I think, again, it's a lot of the topics that we've had to deal with here at DMA. I know, and we're going to talk about this definitely. I think imposter syndrome, we're going to talk about it from a personal standpoint too, because it arises everywhere. And we've experienced it in a number of different ways, and that's what we really why we want to explore this. And again, not my top choice for topics, but it's one that I think that's really important because it's evolving. And so if we're going to start with the definition, it's loosely defined as doubting your abilities and feeling like a fraud.
Right.
And it mostly affects high achieving people who find it difficult to accept their accomplishments. Many question whether they're deserving of the accolades or not. And so, again, this definition is around high achieving people. I think it's people in general, because who gets to determine what high achievement is? I mean, we can in certain things, obviously in sports and when numbers are involved, but to me, someone who's trying to progress in any way, shape, or form is most likely going to experience a moment of self-doubt. Yeah. And that's what's the root of imposter syndrome, is self-doubt. And so where did this term come from? And so basically, these two psychologists in 1978, so going back quite a while, almost 50 years, is founding,
around when I was born.
Oh, it was. You were born in 78. Okay. Founding study. They had this founding study, and they termed what they were looking at as imposter phenomenon versus syndrome. And it mainly focused on high achieving women. So we'll dive into that a little bit, but here in a minute. And when I first heard the term, it was already being referred to as imposter syndrome. And and maybe it wasn't the first time, but when I really started to pay attention to the notion was when I read Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In.
Yep.
And I took an excerpt from that, and I want to share it with our listeners. She explained that many people, but especially women, feel fraudulent when they are praised for their accomplishments. And again, this is a direct quote from her book. Instead of feeling worthy of recognition, they feel undeserving and guilty, as if a mistake has been made. So despite being high achievers, even experts in their fields, women can't seem to shake the sense that it's only a matter of time until they are found out for who they really are, imposters with limited skills or abilities. Now remember, Lean In was a book specifically written about women, but for men and women. It would be great for a man to read that book to come from the perspective. But yeah, that's when I first was like, oh, I feel this. And, I was already a business owner at this point, a struggling business owner at the time, not because the business was struggling, but I was really a struggling leader at the time. And it really stood out to me. So it was kind of my first remembrance of when I first understood or heard imposter syndrome and could relate to it.
And for people who don't know who Sheryl Sandberg is, at the time when she launched this book, she was COO of Facebook.
Yes.
And it was probably, I know it was in the 2010s, like it was like 2012.
Oh yeah.
early, like 10 years ago.
10 years ago, yeah, at least.
Yeah.
It could be longer than that, but yeah.
So here's this woman at a seat, in the C-level at arguably one of the fastest growing companies, in history here in the U.S., and she's feeling this way.
Absolutely.
So it's a little sad. It really is a little sad, but I'm so glad she said it, and I absolutely understand it as well.
Yeah, and I think what I am learning in the continuous study about it, because I want to continuously understand it for myself, and then obviously as a leader to help others with it. And I want our organization to be an organization that accepts that this is something people are feeling.
Yeah.
And then I want us to do things to help navigate around that. And I'll talk about the healthy versions of it and in a second, but I know that it's very common. In fact, one recent study estimates that more than 80% of adults experience imposter syndrome at some point in their lives. So the origin of imposter phenomenon, as it was originally coined and then has now morphed into syndrome, really was focused on women. But the reality is it affects men and women. Now, women just may be more likely to talk about it, where the study came from, and especially as they became more prevalent in the workplace, because again, that's where a lot of the original work was focused on. But I think when I read that 80% of adults experience, that's a lot, but I think that the other 20%
They're not telling the truth.
Well, or they can't realize it about themselves because, self-doubt is real. And, through the study, obviously there's very famous women, from Hollywood superstars such as Charlize Theron and Viola Davis, to business leaders, as we said, Sheryl Sandberg, and even former First Lady Michelle Obama have confessed to experiencing it. So it's becoming now more part of what we are used to. And one of the other things that I found out is when I said it's not just about women, for instance, Paul McCartney, he talks about it. And you think about it, Paul has written over 30 number one Billboard hits. He's won 18 Grammys. He's estimated to be worth over $1 billion. So just those few markers of success indicate that he's the real deal, right? Like he's definitely not an imposter, but he in a recent interview, he talks about still feeling like one. And what he was quoted as saying is that you never think you're good. I really ought to think that I'm fantastic because I had this pile of achievements, but I'm still going on and saying to myself, oh, I can't do it. In fact, there's a line he talks about, and he said in my latest album that states, everybody else busy doing better than me. That is a line from his song. And he says, I still think that way. I really do think that. I have to argue with myself and think that's probably not true. So here is one of the greatest musical artists of our time. And in every indication has proven his abilities. And yet he still, in his mind, is telling himself, it's coming out in lyrics in his song that's questioning whether or not he is the real deal, and essentially that he's an imposter. And I like what he has to say. I have to argue with myself and think that's probably not true, which is part of the antidote to dealing with imposter syndrome, which we'll talk about here in a second. But I just, again, originally focused on women in high achieving roles. But the reality is that it isn't just about women. It's about men and women, because it's really a way of that we're thinking about ourselves. And that in a lot of the research that I've read about it is that we think it's not that we don't think we're worthy or that we weren't able to accomplish these great things, but we tend to think it was based on pure luck, that we fell into something. And I just finished reading, and for those of us seeing on YouTube, you can see the book here, and you bought this for me for Mother's Day, so thank you. But I just finished reading the book Finding Me by Viola Davis, and she talks about being on the set of the movie Doubt. So that was a movie with Meryl Streep, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Amy Adams, famous actors. And she talks about sitting around a table, working on the script, and how they were talking about feeling like they were imposters. Now, these are people at the top of their game. By the time she was doing movies, Viola Davis had already been acknowledged incredibly for her stage work.
Sure.
Successful television actor, graduated Juilliard. You know, she had these indicators that she was the real deal, but yet she was sitting around this table. And I bring this up to say that she talks about it in the book, and she says Meryl Streep stopped her, or in this conversation said to her, "But Viola, you and I know the truth." And what she was stating was, it's okay to stand up with swagger in a way and lean into your abilities and what you've accomplished if you've done the work. And she says, we are doing the work. We know what goes into making a successful movie. And what she talks about in this instance is using that imposter feeling to make her work better. So I want to state that because it's easy to think about it as being a negative thing. Imposter syndrome, like you said, it's cringy.
Yeah.
But wait a minute, what if we use it and we're conscious of the beginning of it? I don't know. Yeah. I think of everything kind of on this, not everything, but a lot of things that we talk about on this podcast on a spectrum. And if one side of the spectrum is a healthy version, because sometimes feeling like an imposter can make you feel more prepared. It can make you want to work harder. And working harder is definitely not always, and we're going to dig into that a little bit, the antidote to imposter syndrome, but it can make you want to be more prepared or make you want to learn more. And I think that's a healthy way to feel, is that I don't feel totally prepared in this moment. That's not imposter syndrome. That is, I'm feeling like I need to prepare myself more for this. Now, when the preparedness keeps you from moving forward and creates paralysis or creates just some negative self-doubt that turns into anxiety, and the list goes on and on. Now we're into the syndrome, and then that can easily progress into the most unhealthy form of it, which requires, at the end of the day, therapy and help. I mean, because it can manifest itself into an extreme, version of a psychological, something requiring psychological help. And so I think if we can use the tenets of it, the rooted in self-doubt, and turn that into more self-awareness. I'm aware in this moment that I'm not completely prepared. You want to talk about imposter syndrome? We could ask David how the two of us felt that first couple of episodes. We don't know what the hell we're doing. We didn't go to podcasting school. You can Google how to be a podcaster. That didn't help us one damn bit. When the microphone goes on, right, and that damn red dot that we're looking at over there, you can feel like, who the hell am I to be sitting in this chair talking to people? And then, like Paul McCartney, then I tell myself the truth. You are someone, as is Megan, who has experienced things that you want to share with others so that potentially their path is less lonely and certainly less bumpy. We do need bumps because we need to learn. Mm-hmm. We need to learn. But when I think about it in that light, we had to tell ourselves the truth. Well, what is the truth? Well, the truth is, if no one listens to the damn thing, we might be imposters. Yes. And we might need to work on it a little bit more.
Yes.
But thankfully, we know that not to be the case.
No, you guys keep coming back.
You do. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. But some of these topics do make me feel, they do kind of incite some anxiousness, but I also think that can be a good thing.
Yeah.
And so I think, again, it's easy to think about imposter syndrome and this cringe-worthy way of, I experience that all the time and I feel bad about it, or I'd never experienced that, which is a whole nother issue in my opinion. But it's when we can think about it as being something that's real. We can be more compassionate with ourselves and graceful to ourselves and others. And we know that in order to be good leaders and to be self-smarter, we have to be more empathetic. And I think realizing what this is and where it comes from and how to navigate it is a a very important part of a self-smarter journey and a journey for any leader in any setting.
So you mentioned earlier that the original study started in 1978, but obviously we've had 40 some odd years. I won't say the exact number because maybe it's how old I am, but 40 some odd years to study this more and learn more about it. So what are experts saying about it now?
It's interesting. I think, like I said, the original study focused on women exclusively. And then it also on high achieving women. And so if you think about 1978, I wouldn't say that we were looking at diversity and inclusivity through
the lens that we are now.
Well, we are now. We're being forced to now. We're not anywhere near, and I think both of our opinions where we need to be, but we're further down the road than we were in 1978. So one of the eye-opening resources that for me was listening to the Dare to Lead podcast with Brene Brown, and she had these two, I would call them two leading experts relative to this topic, and they wrote one of Harvard Business Review's most read articles in history, and it was titled, "Stop Telling Women They Have Imposter Syndrome." And so that was the article, and they've written more about it. But since then, and Brene has this great interview with them, I think that was probably, the interview was well over a year and a half, maybe even closer to 2 years ago. But what they say in the article is that they talk through the fact, and I've talked a little bit about it, but feeling unsure doesn't make you an imposter. Mm-hmm. So feeling self-doubt and being aware of when it's setting in and understanding why is not a bad thing, but that's not an imposter syndrome. But it seems as though we can be wired to think that. And so we have to understand why that is. And we're going to talk about some different types of, that lead us towards down that path here in a second. And then they talk about bias and exclusion, that excels feelings of self-doubt. So you're thinking about, there's a lot of bias that can come into a work environment or a team environment that can make someone feel less than.
God, my worst nightmare.
It is. And it's so not only is this imposter syndrome something that us as individuals need to be conscious of, but definitely for those of us that are leading groups, again, wherever that may be, we need to make sure that we're having environments where there is less potential for that. So making sure that we have, a diverse place for people to express themselves, a place for people to show up in their genuine way. And, we learned this the hard way. We didn't learn this because we thought this was going to help us navigate imposter syndrome. But the result of us being a company that's completely committed to development to include really helping people understand how they are wired and how they are motivated and all of the tools that we use, it has inadvertently helped us to navigate those moments when people are feeling less than, because we can identify it and all the ways that we are interacting with people. And so the other thing that they talk about in the article is confidence doesn't equal competence. And I think that there's two sides to that. I think some extra confident people can show up as the most competent because confidence can shadow a lot of things. And the flip side, extremely competent people can show up with lack of confidence. And there's then there's the flip side to those feelings. And I think too, what the ladies in these particular, and I'm sorry, I did not cite their names. We'll make sure that we have that in the show notes there'll be a lot of meat in the show notes for our listeners. But I like that they talk about the notion of fixing the bias that can exist in they're talking about the workplace, but I see it larger than that. Fixing the bias versus fixing the women in this particular instance. In the article, it's talking about women, but versus fixing the individual.
Bias, the problem.
Yeah, I think there needs to be work on both sides. Is what I think. I think when I say sides, I think there needs to be work from an individual standpoint, but also from the work the environment needs to also need to be conscious of, whoever's leading that particular environment.
To your point, if 80% of the population feels this way, then 80% of your business population feels this way. And so how are you from a cultural perspective managing that, leading that change? You know, so that's what I think I'm hearing from you, is that we have to make sure as business leaders that within our organizations, we know it's happening because again, 80% of the population is telling the truth about it.
Right.
So being aware and helping people navigate that on their terms individually, giving them the open space to be honest about it, which I think you're going to get into.
Yeah. And I think too, like, we have to also understand that it's not just how their personality is and how, you know, again, the things that we use to study, but there's a lot that goes into demographics of individuals, right? So
different backgrounds.
Like, I mean, and that can be from anything from
different origin
sexual
stories.
orientation. That can be, you know, it could be your demographic, like how you're raised. Were you raised poor or were you not raised poor? And I mean, there's so many, again, like I said, general demographics and that play into why someone
would feel that way.
Could be feeling that way. And that's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
You know, for individuals, certainly, who are not on the journey towards self-awareness, but definitely for organizations trying to lead a diverse group of people and who are committed to that. And so I think I think what the authors are encouraging us to do is to not blanket this or come up with these generic fixes for something that is actually, it really needs to be tailored from an understanding point of view to the individuals. And in terms of company cultures, I think there just needs to be a commitment to supporting self-awareness and self-discovery and having a way for people to communicate how they're feeling in any given moment. And so that's obviously part of what we'll talk about relative to how leaders can, as individuals, anyone listening to this podcast, as you as individuals can deal with imposter syndrome and then certainly navigate it within your groups that you're leading.
So really what you've done here, and thank you, is you've set the stage for the origin. Now let's talk about the variations.
Okay.
There've got to be differences. Like there've got to be different types of feelings. How would you describe that?
Yeah, there's not a lot of that I could find in this work of tools that could help me say, okay, as individuals, how are we showing up relative to imposter? If imposter syndrome impacts people in different ways, how can we apply that to different types of personalities, if you will? And so I found a researcher. She's considers herself or is deemed a leading imposter syndrome researcher, which that's heavy. And she's written a lot about it, but she basically describes 5 main types of imposters. And she wrote this book, The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women, Why Capable People Suffer from Imposter Syndrome and How to Thrive in Spite of It. I'm thinking that's a long title and she might want to rethink that just as a marketer. But anyway, that was her book. I did not read the book, but there's been a lot written about that book. And she basically says that there are these 5 competence types. And she says they reflect our internal beliefs around what competency means to you. Okay. Because again, think about it. Imposter syndrome is rooted in self-doubt that is linked to our competencies to be able to do something or to have done something. And where does that credit fall? And I think this is where that dangerous piece of humility comes in.
Yes.
So just humility's absolutely something we should possess as servant leaders and as the self-smarter leaders. But when humility becomes that, oh, shucks, I didn't participate or that was just dumb luck, that's when humility becomes a problem. And so I loved these 5 types. And boy, they can really speak. I mean, they all can speak to us. I won't go through all of them, and we'll definitely put the link in the show notes. But the first one being the perfectionist.
Uh-oh, can't relate to that. You can't either. Just kidding. This is super, this is a popular one, I'm sure.
Yeah. So for those of you who might identify as a perfectionist, you basically we're primarily focused on how we do things, and to the point to where we demand perfection in yourself and every aspect of life. So we're constantly searching for an unflawed existence, which we know does not exist. And I'm a recovering perfectionist. Obviously, we wouldn't have this podcast, right? Because we talk about mostly about all the things we got wrong and what we've learned through it. So we're both recovering in this way, but I think it's easy to still fall into that in many ways in our lives, especially as seasons change. And, when you're in this competency, instead of acknowledging the hard work that we've put in after completing a task, we might find ourselves criticizing small mistakes or feeling shamed of failures along the way, instead of accepting that as being part of the journey. Instead of saying, wow, we did this, it's easy to say, oh, but I stumbled on that. We do this all the time with a podcast. We'll finish wrapping this, and I'll think of 3 things that didn't go as well as I wanted it to. Now, some of that is so that we can get better, but some of that is unnecessary. And I wouldn't necessarily say that we're in search of perfectionism or perfection on this podcast, but I can feel it in that moment. I'm just like, okay, let's learn from that. But that didn't make the podcast
right
a failure. Come on, so it's that type of thinking. The second one is the natural genius. And these people have spent life picking up new skills with little effort. So I know so many people around me that have this incredible ability to learn things very fast. And therefore, because they believe that they should always be able to learn something new to them immediately and with little help along the way. And they think that because of their competency that they should be able to handle anything with little difficulty. And when you start to think about leadership and leading people, it's not easy. No. And so I think a lot of very successful leaders who are feeling imposter syndrome, it's because potentially their competency around the work has come easy for them.
The people are hard.
And I can say that I related to that because marketing was something that, even though marketing as a discipline is very challenging with all the different aspects to it today, in its essence, it's come natural for me. It was something that my competence was high in. But boy, when it came to leading this company and becoming a CEO, I felt very imposterish. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about our own personal imposter stories, but I think too, the natural genius, that if something doesn't come easy, they don't get it right the first time, then, we can feel ashamed or embarrassed. And that's kind of where it really sets in. The third one being the rugged individualist, or also she calls the soloist. And, this group of people, and again, I think I can relate to all 5 of these, this group of people, handle everything solo. And if you can't success independently, then you consider yourself unworthy. And boy, that is something that it can easily, where imposter can creep in, especially since most work today is collaborative. And there's very few solo ventures anymore. So
at work, but these, people come out of college and all of their schooling, and they've been alone. I mean, they now do a lot more,
right,
I think, integrative study with other people, but collaborative study. But you think about it, you're on your own by yourself studying with your face in a book for, 21 years, and then you're set free into the work environment, and suddenly you're supposed to be able to do it in a group. I mean, that's hard. Plus, people like you and I, we're both only children.
Yeah.
I sometimes didn't have a choice but to do it alone.
Right.
So I definitely resonate with this one because
because it's your origin.
Yeah.
You're just explaining what we talked about. It was your origin relative to growing up as an only child. I don't know that in school today that collaborative study and collaborative, it's not as scarce as it was when we were coming up in school. So I think, we've evolved some there, but people who struggle with this, when they ask for help or when they want to be collaborative, they can almost be ashamed or embarrassed because they're asking for help. And so that's where, the struggle can set in. The fourth one being, exactly. The fourth one being the expert. So before you can consider your work a success, you want you want to learn everything there is to know about the topic. So you feel like you have to be the expert on every aspect before you can speak to someone about it or to even attempt to start working. And what's interesting about that is completely ignoring mastery. And I'm going to speak to an excerpt from Seth Godin's book, The Practice, which speaks and talks and praises mastery. Mastery is the art of continuous and consistent practicing what you do. So when you are in a mindset of, I have to be the expert at everything, what you believe is that since you should have all the answers to all the things, you consider yourself a failure and a fraud when you can't simply answer a question about a particular topic or encounter some knowledge that you've previously missed. And we see this happen. A lot of folks that have come from a background where they've had years of marketing expertise and they come into our company, they feel not based on our expectation, but their own expectations of themselves. If they can't answer every question immediately, well, there's no way.
Feel like a failure.
And the reason why is they're a very talented marketer. They wouldn't have got hired.
Sure.
I mean, we still hire for cultural values and things more than we do aptitude, but aptitude still matters.
Yes.
But we have zero expectation that they know in our way and the way that we do marketing. We expect to have to show them that way. And so, but we do see it and but we can identify it now and we can see it before it becomes a problem for that individual. And we can coach them through it because these are natural tendencies. Yeah. And so these competencies, these 5 that I'm working through, and I'm about to get to number 5, these are natural tendencies that have probably stemmed most likely from our childhood and our upbringing or our early experience out in the career world. It could obviously schooling could have a lot to do with that too. So I think that this is really what these are, is these natural tendencies that come out in us. And again, I think most of us could have multiple of these competencies as long as we understand them and can identify them when they're happening. Then we can then navigate in a healthier direction. So the last one being the superhero. So you link competence to your ability to succeed in every role that you hold: student, friend, wife, employee, parent, you name it. And failing to successfully navigate the demands of these roles simply proves, in our opinions, that we're inadequate. So if we're not perfect and not perfect, but if we cannot succeed and be successful, and this is usually where, you're really looking in this instance towards other people's, like you're starting to compare. And I think this is where a lot of comparison comes in with this particular competency, the superhero. So what we tend to do is we push ourselves to the limit and we expend so much energy trying to be the best at this role. And when I was thinking about this particular one, when I first read it, I didn't necessarily feel connected to the superhero as a CEO, because as I've said, I didn't look a lot to others because I knew that my role in this company, I mean, again, it's kind of this, I felt more alone than I felt like there was a group out there that I could go and compare myself to. Yeah. Company-wise, yes. Performance-wise, yes, certain things. But me as the CEO, I didn't resonate. But boy, when I dug into this one more, when I thought about being a young mom and watching other mothers navigate the infant stage with what seemed to be just this ease. And I struggled with, I wasn't making her baby food and using cloth diapers with, like I was. And the breastfeeding. Well, I did it for as long, I don't want to get too personal, but I did it for as long as it worked for my daughter and I. And I remember when Mackie was 1 week old and we went to the pediatrician, she's screaming her head off. And my pediatrician just simply looked me in the eye. Again, educated, successful businesswoman, looked me in the eye and go, where is this child's pacifier? And I said, well, I read in a book that if she took the pacifier too early, that it would do all these things. And she's like, this child needs a pacifier to pacify herself. We're not doing it just to make her to quit crying. And what she basically said after this lesson was, use your instincts. Quit looking at other moms whose babies don't have pacifiers and think that that's some marker of success. Like, use your gut instinct. You could tell that Mackie was just one of those babies that was in the minute. Yeah. And when she didn't, she didn't. And she wasn't messed up too bad.
She seems okay.
She seems okay. So, but I'm just using that as a very loose example of, I was trying to go back in my mind
That's
of when was I trying to be motherhood? And you want to talk about imposter.
And probably fatherhood too.
No, it is. Imposter syndrome. Boy.
Someone gives you a kid.
Have a kid. Yeah.
For the first time. I don't know how to handle this thing.
Right. And so it's, and there's plenty of books about it. There are. But we know what these books are. There are a lot of opinions.
They are.
And they're good and they can be good guides. But when you use them against and without your own better judgment and your own instincts, sometimes, especially when it comes to instances like that, then I think you find yourself in a little bit of trouble. So I found that those 5 competencies that this particular researcher lined out, it helped because it helped me to understand that there's just these instinctual things that come from us and the way we were reared all the way through childhood into our early career that formed some of these ideals or feelings inside of us. And it's okay now that we can identify that and we know that others have that too. Oh, wait a minute. We can navigate that to our advantage, quite frankly. Yeah. When we know, we can do. And when we know, we can be better. Yeah. So
all of this is so rich and frightening at the same time. And here's why.
Well, that wasn't the... I know that wasn't... I didn't mean to frighten you.
No.
God, listeners, I hope you're not scared.
It's so true. It's so true. And I can see myself in several of these, the 5 that you just listed, I for sure can resonate with 3. And that's now that I'm aware, I can do some work on that. But what do recommend, on that part, on that notion, what do experts recommend people do to navigate this?
Well, again, I think there's over 5 million searches on Google. Yeah. I mean, 5 million, hits when you search imposter syndrome. So it's a deep pool. It's been around for 40 years and there's a lot of people talking about it. And what I just found, what I have found to be true for us here and what in my own journey and where I think we can kind of boil it down to 3 things or strategies to help us resolve. The feelings are going to exist, but we can resolve those feelings productively if we, first of all, acknowledge our feelings, challenge our doubts when they set in, and then 3, avoid comparing ourselves to others. And so when you're talking about, starting with acknowledging how you're feeling, and that was hard for me. It's still to this day hard to acknowledge, that I'm feeling that coming on or that I feel that way in this certain instance. I'm learning in this season. This is not a secret, but I'm struggling right now currently with the season of not being in the day-to-day. I feel a bit as an imposter of not having the intense responsibilities that I had just 6 months ago relative to this business. And quite frankly, the mother of a college student, and both of those things have transitioned for me. And so I feel like this imposter because I'm still trying to find my next, and acknowledging that. I've acknowledged it to you. Now I'm acknowledging to everybody. Damn person is listening out there.
Hey, y'all.
But definitely a therapist and working through that and acknowledging it with this team that I'm in search, and certainly close friends. So I think, acknowledge our feelings. Again, that can be with a trusted friend if it's a personal situation or even professional. And in sharing sharing these feelings with others, especially if you're a leader.
Yeah.
Like I struggled with that. And here's what I'm struggling with now is a big part in A, helping yourself deal with these feelings, and B, showing up in a way that shows others that it's okay to feel that way, but it's not okay to sit in that and let it turn into something dire and distressful and potentially physically and mentally unhealthy for you.
Right.
And so it also, when you do it, and I'm learning this, it builds connection. It's a form of building trust. So acknowledging that you're feeling inadequate, or acknowledging if you have a trusted friend, when you talk about something you've achieved and then you downplay it, being the type of friend or being the type of coworker, colleague, leader, team player that says to a person, wait a minute, don't downplay that. Yes, there were more people involved, but you led that. You led that effort. You made us see that, I don't know, that project in a different light that brought it to close, or whatever the example may be. Yes, I just noticed it with my daughter, talking about her accomplishments in college, and I could hint, just a tin of, well, I couldn't have done it without you. Correct. That is a correct statement, but you did the work. Mm-hmm. We supported you in that work. Mm-hmm. So when you see it in people that you care about, I think helping them in a respectful way mm-hmm. is another way that we can help to start to put the syndrome piece of this imposter phenomenon that we know is very real. We can help put it in its place, because it shouldn't be something that we try to extinguish. Mm-mm. Because like I said, there's a healthy version of this feeling that can help motivate us to be better.
Yes.
But I do think that line is very thin and can easily be crossed over. So I definitely want to acknowledge that. And then challenging your doubts. What did Paul McCartney say? Thinking, wait a minute, is that true? And the best way to challenge your doubts is that factual?
Right.
And so we talk about, is this podcast, are we imposters on this podcast? I don't know. Our numbers are growing.
Yeah.
I mean, somebody's listening.
Somebody likes us.
Unless Jordan and David on our team are just listening over and over and again. I think they know how to filter out those repeat listens. But I think let's use facts to say, wait a minute, is that feeling that I'm having, is that real? Is that possible?
Fair.
Is that fair?
Yeah.
Maybe talk, again, kind of acknowledging not only the feelings, but wait a minute, is this thought I have in my head even realistic? Mm-hmm. And so again, that can be something you do with yourself, or certainly with a trusted cohort. And then avoid comparing yourself to others, because I think that is also at the root of a lot of imposter syndrome is, I'm not as good as that person, or I'm doing this differently, so therefore it's not as. And I think that's something that I have been very conscious of with the transition of leadership from to you as president of this company. Is I know it's easy to compare yourself to the way I led this company, and I don't believe that you should lead the company the way that I did. In some cases, like, definitely if something's working, let's do that. But you have to lead this company, and you have to make decisions with your authentic self and with your gifts in order for it to grow and become, a better version of what it has been for 18 years, the next 18 years. And so I think, again, not only seeing it in ourselves, but working to understand when it is impacting someone. Or in this case, I thought a lot about the feelings that you might feel stepping into the role as president, so I could do things to help you avoid as much as possible what I could to help you avoid going down this dark rabbit hole that could be unproductive when it was not necessary. Mm-hmm. You knew marketing, but you had a lot to learn about other aspects of the business, and I knew that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was, in terms of imposter syndrome, I mean, you and I have been talking about this for a year relative to me coming into a new role, an elevated role. And I think the preparedness, like if I'm giving you feedback, and if I'm telling people who are listening who may feel this way, I'm lucky. I feel blessed to have a leader who prepared me to be able to hear that, and I could plan and then live in awareness, because I'm very, at this stage of my career, we've been through this rodeo a couple times with me growing, and I would be in a position to where I'd be like, I don't know how to do that. Like she's trusting me and putting me in this role, and I don't know how the hell to do that, but I'm certainly not going to tell her that because I'm not worth it. Right. I got over that. And then I realized, wait a minute, if I feel weak in any area that she's coaching me on or guiding me toward, I need to be honest about it with her so she knows, so she can help me. And I need to tackle that thing next time before she ever gets to it. Let her show you, let her show me, and then go for it.
And practice.
And
so I think from a leadership perspective, we can help, like I said, help those that we're leading by giving them the opportunity, the context of why it's important, and then showing them. And we have a whole episode on transfer of knowledge, AKA delegation. This is where I think we can help people navigate the feelings of being an imposter when we properly transfer knowledge. I can't remember what episode that is, but go back and if you want to dive into this a little bit more, but that to me is where, when we learned here how to properly delegate and or transfer knowledge, we started to also help people keep from falling into these feelings that we're describing in this episode. So that's something that we didn't always get right. And then we learned that is a way to help navigate this from a leadership perspective. And
I'm lucky. There's a lot of people out there that are probably listening to this going, well, you have, and I've actually been told that. I've been told, well, you have an exceptional leader. So, everybody wants leadership. Everybody wants to receive good leadership, whether or not they realize it or not, they do in a work or any type of organization where you're working towards a common goal. Right. And not everybody gets it. And so I have been blessed in that way.
Yes, you have. And I appreciate that. I can see where your point of view and whoever is sharing that with you. Yes. I had great leadership in the business. Therefore, our business is successful. I had incredible leaders that taught me how to run a fiscally sound business and how to make decisions that made us successful and progressive in what we do and how to take risk. I didn't necessarily have a leader helping me in the areas that we're talking about in this podcast, hence we have the damn podcast. Right. That doesn't mean I didn't search for it and find it. And so there's so many resources out there that you might not have a person in a seat that you can go and learn from, but I hope you can learn from this podcast and see that as a way. I hope you can pick up on all the resources that we share that are abundantly out there. And please, if you have more to share with us, it's a constant journey. But I think learning these particular things, if we're learning them about ourselves first and foremost, which you did that work, it had nothing to do with me. You made the decision to be an aware person about yourself and be an aware leader and an evolved leader and a self-smarter leader. You made that decision. So because you made that decision, you could lean into someone who was also, I just happened to be in the same place as you. But I think we could have shared this exchange, whether I was a CEO here and directly working with you, or one that you were engaged with, if I were outside of the company. And so, yes, I think luck has something to do with it. And it kind of goes back to the old adage that is one of the founding principles that I used to guide me when I was completely feeling like an imposter the first 5 years of owning this business. But are you lucky or are you smart? And what people who are suffering in the moment from imposter syndrome do is they tend to put luck as being the reason they had their successes. And I've talked about it on this podcast, I read 2 books the day I resigned from the corporate posts, or started reading them the day I resigned from the corporate posts that I left to start this business from. And I read The Purple Cow by Seth Godin, and I read Are You Lucky, Are You Smart by Bo Peabody. And what Bo Peabody said in that book is the smartest people realize when they are lucky. So what he was saying to all of us was, and those that read the book, and what I'm saying to you now is, luck, yes, plays into a lot of our success, but we have to be smart enough to know when those moments exist. And that's what I would say that has been one of your gifts, is understanding those moments when it was time, and giving yourself, again, the compassion and the grace to, to dive into areas of the business that didn't come natural for you, or that you felt like you just didn't have the competency for yet. And, what I know for sure is that success doesn't require perfection. Yeah. And true perfection is practically impossible. And so failing to achieve it does not make us a fraud. Yeah. Or an imposter in this case. And so we have to offer ourselves kindness and compassion instead of judgment and self-doubt. And that way we can maintain a more realistic perspective and motivate ourselves towards healthier growth. And so, I think there's this spectrum of the early stages of feeling like an imposter. And if we can overcome that with preparedness and asking for help and sharing our feelings, we can turn that into, strength almost, right? But then if we allow it to go to an extreme, that's when we're in need of getting some help. And believe me, I feel like, and I'll admit this to our listeners, and this to be true, I've been at both ends and can easily find myself at one or the other. And so I believe that in the notion that feeling like an imposter is absolutely real. And I don't feel ashamed when it sets in. And I think because of that now, it's because I believe that I've learned how to identify it, share it with others, and learn how to question myself. Is this really real?
Kind of process it.
Yes. Yeah. And so just, what I love Seth Godin, and we read, I think, again, if you're looking for a book on just mastery of, and he talks a lot, and in fact, a lot of his promotion of the book, The Practice, it was about imposter, talking about how we can feel like we're imposters. And reading from an excerpt of his book, he says, we are easily confused by I am. I am 6 feet tall isn't a choice. It's a given. On the other hand, I am a chef. It's up to you or not. We've been fooled into believing that roles like writer, leader, and artist are birthrights, fixed in a place, something we either are or we aren't. That leaders are given talents or privileges, not choices. The truth is simpler. If you want to be a leader, then lead. If you want to be a writer, then write. I am of service is something each of us can choose to become. It only takes a moment to begin. And once you begin, you are. And again, I'm going to have Jordan put the whole excerpt from the book in our show notes, because I think it's really important. And what he's saying is, yeah, there are some things that we can't change, how tall we are, how fast we can run, But once there's so many things in life that we can simply choose to be that. I can choose to be a chef if I want. I don't need to win Chopped or to be a master chef at something. Yeah. If I make a decision to practice the art of cooking, at some point that mastery will transcend itself into someone's opinion. I will be a chef, and most notably my own. You want to be a writer? Learn to write. And that's what we talk about a lot around leadership. It's a decision. Mm-hmm. We're not born great leaders, but we make the decision to be a leader. Then we make the decision of what kind of leader we want to be and or strive to become. And so I love that as the antidote, even though it's a little bit, he's not necessarily speaking to imposter syndrome in this way, but in many ways, this is the antidote. Make the decision. Make the decision, and don't put other people's necessarily their achievements or these arbitrary comparisons as to whether or not you are competent or the real deal in this instance. And so it's a good reminder. I have it printed out, and I have to read this a lot, and I'm having to lean into this a lot now. I'm not only for myself, but my daughter who's pursuing a career in acting. So I just found it to be very, very helpful when we're dealing with these thoughts in our heads. So that's why I wanted to end with that.
I love it. I mean, I'm appreciative of it. I'm appreciative of this entire episode. I think that the content and the place it's coming from is a place of help and a place of, quite frankly, empathy, because we've been there. And so for people who are listening, I think they're going to really appreciate it. And, if anything, it's helpful in your everyday life, and just know that you're not alone. If you feel like you may have a little bit of that imposter syndrome, that's okay. There are ways to navigate it. Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Let's transition from that ginormous topic over to another one.
Another yay! I love ginormous music moments.
I know. Well,
those make me happy.
I really don't know that there is a bigger. I mean, you of course are going to have an opinion, but I don't know that there's a bigger star potentially on the planet until this man came along, Elvis Presley.
Yes, the king.
I know. And there's a big movie out right now, and you saw it.
I did.
I got to see it with my mom. What did you think about it?
Well, first of all, I mean, my mother was, I would consider her a big Elvis fan, and I remember his music for sure. It was definitely being played a lot with a lot of other music in our home, but then definitely, it's crazy. I remember his death. And I wasn't that old.
No, you weren't.
No, but I remember.
He died in 1977.
I know, and so I was 5.
8th, I think.
So there's one of my earlier memories of why is everybody freaking out? I didn't, understand that, and now I do. But the movie I thought was exceptional.
Exceptional.
I will tell listeners, for those of you who have not listened, we will not spoil anything because you know the story. But I learned so much from it. Deep. It is long.
It goes deep.
It goes long. So get the extra large popcorn. Yeah. And because it is a long movie, but it's so well done. And I just did not know. I knew how amazing of an artist he was, and I continue to listen to his music to this day. I just didn't know some of the nuances of his story, and I certainly didn't know what a son of a gun his manager was. I only knew in that one way when they when Dolly Parton turned them down because they wanted to own the rights to I Will Always Love You. I did not know all the stuff. So just mad respect, and just even not just for Elvis, but his family. But wow, what an incredible talent, and a human. He was a good man.
Yeah.
I mean,
kind of humble.
Humble. Yes.
He was a 3 with on the Enneagram, I think.
Oh, he has a hard 2-wing.
Yeah. But for sure a humble one. And yeah, I like how they went super deep into his origin story so that you could have more empathy as they built the story. So highly recommended if you love, rock and roll, if you want to see some origin of rock and roll and blues.
Yes.
And Beale Street is mentioned a lot, which I grew up going to Memphis because my mother is like maybe the biggest Elvis fan. I mean,
seriously. I was so excited. I saw it right before you all did, and I was so excited for I cannot wait to text your mom.
Yeah, I mean,
so when you know somebody, when you know somebody's a super fan, you're like, God, I can't. I mean, I knew that other people were giving it rave reviews, but all I cared about was Sarah Hall's review because she was a super fan, so I couldn't wait, and she was so sweet, sending me pictures before the movie, and and then so we're still texting about it.
Good,
and Elvis, because I was like, there's questions I have. I need some things to be answered.
Yeah, she's got them.
She's got the answers.
Yeah, she's like an encyclopedia.
But she did like
Elvis
the movie,
Presley.
right?
She loved it. She's still talking about it. She actually said the other day that it was the best. She's seen them all. And I've forgotten all the people that had played Elvis. She's like, I saw Kurt Russell. I saw. And she goes, I just think that this boy has done the best job of really understanding him. And she said that this actor studied, his name is Austin.
Okay.
I can't remember his last name. And he's from Anaheim, California.
Is this his breakout role?
I don't know that.
Okay.
But I do know this, according to Sarah Hall, he has been
our expert. Yeah. So the rest of, we're going to take this at truth, the truth.
Yes. That he has been studying Elvis for over 2 years.
Well, clearly.
Yeah. And I mean, every move he makes, every mouth, every eyebrow lift, she was like, that's perfect. You know, like she knew Elvis that way because she grew up with him. And in fact, I told you this after there's a part in the movie where there's one of Elvis's first live performances, and my mom leans over to me with her popcorn and goes, I was there.
I mean, that's at the Louisiana Hayride.
The Louisiana Hayride.
That's crazy that she was there.
Yeah, she's like, my daddy took me there. He loved Elvis Presley. She's like, your aunt was running up and down the aisle, and here comes Elvis. And that's, for me, that was the best scene in the movie. So when y'all see it, when they get to the Louisiana Hayride,
yes.
Woo! It is good. It is so, so good. I love the 1969 special, the comeback special.
Yes. That was so good.
It's so good. So, for our music, I mean, Elvis.
Yes.
Everything Elvis.
Everything Elvis.
What a talented individual. And
yes. A tormented.
Yeah.
And also in most of our great talents. And it's sad that we can, especially as it relates to music, we can lose them. And when you watch this movie, you're reminded of the pressure. Yeah. And
I think he felt like an imposter.
He did. And I think and then he definitely had some negative influences. And again, I don't want to ruin it for everyone because I didn't know so much about that part of the Elvis journey or his life. And but it was well portrayed by Tom Hanks, by the way.
Yes,
I mean, that's a difficult role to play.
Who loves music, and he does this with Playtone. He does these musical movies to get history about famous musicians out. I also heard that Lisa Marie, who is Elvis's daughter, and Priscilla Presley both said that this was the best rendition of him and accuracy of their life.
And I took that as being a reason to go see it, but in the end of the day, it was your mom's blessing that I needed to know if it was it was really as good as I thought it was.
Yes.
And she definitely gave it the 5 stars. So
she did.
In my opinion, it's one of the best movies we have out right now.
It is. It's so good. And we needed it, right? Like we needed a really good blockbuster, fun, sort of Americana, like really is what it is. So go see it. And then I am going to tee Jessie up on social media with some fun photos.
Please. Oh gosh, please.
From the 70s.
Yes. I mean, she was around Elvis a lot, let me tell you. I don't know that Elvis and his security guard knew. But
No. Now that would be called stalking.
Okay.
Now that would be, she's got pictures of Elvis like through the window of the car, pictures of Elvis through the crack in a door.
Oh, I think our listeners are going to love seeing some of this.
Yeah. Some of that stuff from the.
So thank you, Sarah, for
from
sharing.
the 4th row.
Whether you are or not, if you know you are,
or whether you know or not, we're going to share it. Well, thank you, Danelle.
Yeah, thank you
all who are listening today.
Yeah.
As Danelle said earlier, it's really important that we treat ourselves with kindness and compassion instead of judgment and self-doubt. So
absolutely
go into the week with that on your hearts and have a wonderful one. And we'll send you off into the week with grateful hearts from us.
Absolutely. Goodbye, everyone. As always, you can connect with us on Instagram and Facebook at Self Smarter Podcast. You can also leave a rating or review if you enjoyed what you heard today. Not only does this mean so much to us, but it also helps other leaders and future leaders find our community. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us in becoming Self Smarter. This podcast is produced by Snacks Media, and music is from a free platform. Well, that is until Brandy Carlisle reaches out to us to write the original score for our podcast. Friends, have a great rest of your day.